Okay. So Ed, we wanted to talk to you first about Finchburg. Could you just provide us some context on kind of the reforms you took there, kind of the steps, to achieving some of the stuff that you wanted to achieve?
Sure. I was police chief in the city of Fitchburg from 2002 to 2007. And it's a small urban city in New England, in Massachusetts. And not unlike a lot of other urban cities in the Northeast who never really recovered from the exit of all the factories from the industrial age, and kind of like had all this housing available, which were originally taken up by factory workers, but the factories were gone. So it made it a very attractive place for new people and immigrants to come to. And when I took over the city, I originally was a police officer in this city for 15 years, and I had left. And after I had done some international work, I came back and I became the police chief. So I was kind of tasked to bring order to a community that was suffering at that time a higher murder rate per capita than the city of Boston. And along with that, the dropout rate for Latino students at that time and minorities was over 40% at the local high school. So we had a massive failure going on in the community in terms of what was going on and the violent crime and subsequent gang activity that went along with it. And when I was hired, I was brought in to perform a war on crime type thing and step up all kinds of enforcement, which I did the first year or so. And the enforcement actually levels went off the charts. And after a year and a half, we found no significant difference.
We'd love to hear, kind of at the end of your term, what changed. We're also really interested in racial bias and police brutality, something you
Sure.
mentioned, was higher enforcement.
Sure.
Yeah.
When I came back to the police department, it became evident to me that we had some really serious problems that weren't being addressed. And one of the first things I did, I asked my commanders, was who do we talk to in the Latino community to start, building relationships? And they didn't say a word. And then one of them came into my office with a 1-foot stack of lawsuits from the Latino community and threw them on my desk and said, basically, this is how we communicate with them. And they sue us and we win. So I was like taken back, like this is insanity. So I had to come up with a different idea. So it wasn't until combination of things happened. First, I started doing advanced graduate courses at Suffolk University in Boston on organizational development while I was chief. And I became familiar with a concept called systems thinking, which was actually created out of MIT in the 1950s and is still in use today and used by some of the best companies in the world. And at the same time, a Latino woman came in. Her name was Syra, a young woman. And she was brought in to work in the public schools to try to raise the performance level of the Latino students. And she came to me and we met. And it turned out, I didn't know it immediately, but she was a systems thinker also. And she was a mentor of probably the #1 systems thinker in the world, Peter Senge from MIT. And we began to talk about systems, and then we began to look at all the crime that was occurring and ask the question, why? What was the root cause of crime in the community? And I started out, not too bright by saying something like, what's the matter with all the Latinos in this community? What's the matter with the fathers? I can't find them. Where are they? Why don't they help? And she said to me, you're the one that has all the power. What are you doing about it? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you got the millions of dollars. You got the guns. You got the cars. You got the ability to do whatever you want. What are you doing about it? So that was the beginning of me asking me a question, which I encourage anybody who's a leader to ask. What do I do to make the problem worse before I step out? And she brought that to me, and I started reflecting on that. Then she began to introduce me to mothers in the community, Latino mothers. And they would come in and I would meet with them and they would blast me. I mean, tell me things like, you cops are the most racist cops. The schools are horrible. They're this, they're that, and the other thing. And I chose to do what? Listen. I didn't respond. This was all anger that was being centered towards me, but I began to listen. And then Sire and I began to talk about systems. What were the roots? And at the time, we had a newspaper in our local area that thrived on reporting the violence and vilifying the Latino community. So they called me one day, I don't know, out of guilt or whatever, and said, you know, maybe there's something we can do this summer to raise some money or something, you know, to help out. And I says, all right. So I talked to Syra and I said, Syra, why don't we do a systems thinking task force of all the leaders in the community? And we'll get together, we'll bring in professional trainers in the field, and we'll train in systems thinking. And we did. We brought in 40 leaders, all the way from law enforcement to social work to probation to you name it, Chamber of Commerce, the hospital, and for the first time, members of the minority community. And they trained us for 2 days on systems thinking. And it's a lot to go into right now, but the results were this. After 2 days, we had done work in groups. We had done work with charts and all types of things. And a young Latino man came out to report out the results of the work. And he came out with systemic racism in the community and lack of economic opportunity for at-risk kids. So when that came out, first thing that happened was there was a college and a university president that were on the team, both white. They both stood up one after the other, along with the publisher of the newspaper, and said, we are not talking about racism. And I took the white police chief's role, stood up, used my power, which is a very powerful position. And I said, yeah, we're going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. So that day, some people left and didn't want anything to do with it, but we began the process. The first thing we did was the police department, who had been serving all kinds of search warrants and getting all kinds of, you know, confiscation of money, property, houses, everything. We'd use that money traditionally for enforcement and equipment. I turned around and offered up that money to create jobs for kids. And other community members did too, including one of the colleges. So we began to hire kids who were at risk over the summer, and we saw a decrease right away in violent crime. So as that went along, we also began discussions on racism. And not everybody wanted to be involved, but we did it. You know, and I remember, where do we start? You know, Syra and I had a good understanding, but how do you get people to have this conversation? And we had a head start because we had done the systemic work. And a lot of people, even if they weren't sure of expressing their agreement with the results, they knew it touched on something important. So I decided that, I asked Syra, I said, why don't we bring in a movie and we'll all watch it? And we brought in the movie Crash. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but no. It's a great movie, and it's about racism, and it's about how everyone has that shadow in them that, you know, needs to be not just tamed, but needs to be educated. And it's not so much a judgmental movie as it is a movie. It's about a cop who's racist and, you know, how he interacts with people. And the good news that comes out of it is he ends up seeing his racism. And then he sees other people in the community that also have it. And even some of the people in the minority community are angry and fighting back. So it was a good start. And anyway, you fast forward after a number of years. Last year, Fitchburg had 1 murder for the whole year. And the dropout rate went down to below 8% for Latino students. So what happened was, at that point when we were in, was a leverage point.